The Moretti Hall had been dressed for peace. That was the purpose of the evening. The candles, the wine, the white flowers, everything had been selected to communicate neutrality. In the language of men who sat at these tables, that meant, tonight we are all the same kind of dangerous. Elena Moretti sat beside her husband at the head table. She was wearing the blue dress Lorenzo had chosen. She was sitting the way Lorenzo preferred, still composed, a portrait of the kind of wife that told every other family in the room that the Moretti house was stable. Adrian Locke stood behind her. He stood where a guard stood, 2 steps back. 1 step left, visible enough to remind people that Elena was protected, invisible enough not to interrupt the evening. He had been standing like that for 2 years. 2 years behind Elena's chair. 2 years of being exactly the kind of person that rooms full of powerful men did not look at twice. Elena had attended 11 peace summits in the years she had been Lorenzo's wife. She had learned to read rooms the way other people read documents, looking for the things that did not belong. The flowers on the main table were white. That was expected. The candles were real wax, not electric. That was expected. The stringed quartet was positioned in the corner they always used. That was expected. The guest book on the entrance table had been signed by every family. That was expected. She had been making her way through the expected inventory of the room since they arrived, the way she always did, the way she had done since she first understood that the most dangerous moments at these gatherings arrived not in the form of argument, but in the form of something ordinary sitting slightly wrong. Elena was looking at the flowers. She looked at the centerpiece on the table. She looked at it, and something in her face changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone who was not paying attention would have caught. The flower was white. It was placed upside down. She looked up at the mezzanine. There was a light up there, the kind of reflected light that was not supposed to be there. She had half a second. She stood. The sound of the shot and the sound of her body reaching Adrian happened in the same moment. The glass behind Adrian shattered. Elena's weight pushed him sideways. They went down together. The hall went absolutely silent. The kind of silence that happened when everyone in a room stopped breathing at the same time. Lorenzo was already on his feet. He said, "Why would my wife die for a guard?" His voice was not loud. That was the thing about Lorenzo Moretti. He was most dangerous when his voice was not loud. Adrian looked at the shattered glass. He looked at the angle of the break. He looked at where Elena had been standing, and where he had been standing, and where the shot had come from. He said, very quietly, "Because it was never meant for her." Lorenzo ordered Adrian disarmed before Elena had been carried out of the room. He did not think about this decision. It was the first decision he made after watching his wife fall, which meant it was not made from the part of his mind that made decisions. It was made from the part that was 17 years old and had watched his father walk into a room and not come out, and had learned in that moment that the only response to losing someone was to immediately locate and address for the source. He had located what looked like the source. The source looked like Adrian. He'd addressed it. That was the first mistake. He made it because he was in pain, and because pain, when it arrived fast enough, looked like anger. Bianca Moretti, his sister, was beside him in seconds. She said what Bianca always said when a situation could be made worse by someone saying the most damaging thing first. A wife who protects a guard forgets her name. She said it quietly. She said it like she was concerned. But she said it while the other families were still watching, which meant she said it into a record. The other families heard it. Two of the elder bosses looked at each other. Lorenzo understood what they were calculating. He had calculated it himself in other rooms about other men. An attack at a peace summit was a message. A wife who threw herself in front of a guard instead of her husband was a different kind of message. Both messages were bad for the same reason. They made Lorenzo look like something was wrong in his house. He had Adrian's jacket pulled back. He had the gun removed. He had two men stationed at the door of the room where Elena was being treated. He had done all of this before he asked the question that mattered. He had not yet asked, "Where did the bullet go?" Vittorio Marchesi came to stand beside him. Vittorio was the senior council elder. He had held that position for 16 years. He was the kind of man who was trusted precisely because he never seemed to want anything for himself. He said softly, "Brother, do not let a moment of confusion become a story the other families tell about you for years." He said, "Let me handle the young man discreetly." He said it with the expression of someone doing something unpleasant so Lorenzo would not have to. Lorenzo looked at Adrian across the room. Adrian was standing with his hands at his sides. His weapons had been taken. He was not trying to run. He was watching the door that Elena had been carried through. Lorenzo said, "What were you to my wife?" Adrian said, "The man she knew someone wanted dead." Lorenzo nearly had him removed, but Bianca had walked to the wall of broken glass. She was looking at the shattered window. She was looking at the angle. She did not say anything. But she stopped moving, and for Bianca, stopping was the closest she came to admitting uncertainty. Elena was not unconscious long. The bullet had passed through the outer edge of her shoulder. Clean, painful, not fatal. She opened her eyes in the small side room, and Lorenzo was already there, standing near the window, not looking at her. He said, "Tell me there was no reason you chose him over me." She said, "I did not choose him over you. I chose the truth before the bullet could bury it." He turned. He said she knew what it looked like. She said, "I did not step in front of him because I loved him more than my husband. I stepped in because I knew the bullet had an old name carved into it." He turned. He said, "That is not what I saw." She said, "I know what it looked like. I need you to ask where the bullet went." He said he had more important questions. She said, "Lorenzo, ask where the bullet went." He looked at her. The expression on her face was not the expression of a woman who had done something she was ashamed of. It was the expression of a woman who was running out of time to explain something that needed explaining. Bianca came to the door. She said quietly to Lorenzo rather than to Elena, "The bullet line was wrong." Lorenzo looked at his sister. Bianca did not apologize to people she disliked. She also did not correct herself when she had said something damaging in front of witnesses. The fact that she was now saying the bullet line was wrong to her brother with no audience meant she actually believed it. Lorenzo said, "Show me." They went back to the hall. Adrian was still there. He had been told to stay, and he had stayed. Lorenzo stood at the angle Bianca showed him. He looked at the broken glass. He looked at the trajectory. If the shot had been meant for him, the glass would have broken on the right side. It had broken on the left. The left side was where Adrian had been standing. Lorenzo did not speak for a moment. Then he looked at Adrian. He said, "She did not choose you." Adrian said, "She did not choose me over you. She chose the truth you were never told to protect." Lorenzo said, "Then tell me the truth." Adrian said, "Not here." He meant, not in front of everyone currently watching them from the edges of the room. Lorenzo understood. He had grown up knowing which truths were told to which rooms. He said, "Come." In the private room, with only Bianca and two of Lorenzo's most trusted men, Adrian and Elena told the story. Elena told most of it. She started where it began, which was not tonight. She said when she was a girl, she had been in a fire. A house that had caught in the night, fast and complete, the way fires caught when they were meant to catch. She had been 7. There was a man who came through the smoke and carried her out. He did not know her. He owed her family nothing. He handed her to the nearest person and went back in for the others. His name was Adrian Locke. She had never forgotten the name because she had been told very specifically to forget it. Several days after the fire, the Locke family was declared to have violated the old alliance terms. They were removed. She had been told this without detail. She had been young enough that detail was not offered. She had been old enough to understand that the name she had been told to forget was the name of the man who had saved her. She had kept it. She had kept it for years. And when a man named Adrian came to work as a guard in the Moretti house, she had recognized him, not immediately, not from his face, from a scar on his wrist where burned skin had healed over, from the way he always positioned himself between her and the nearest exit, and from a sentence she had heard his father say once, which she had also heard Adrian say without realizing he was repeating it, that the best protection was the kind the person being protected never noticed. Lorenzo looked at Adrian. He said, "Who are you?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. He said, "The last name they forgot to bury." He said his name. He said what remained of the family Locke and what had happened to it and how he had survived. He said he had been moved out of the house that night by a woman who had worked for the family and who had understood before he did that surviving meant becoming someone different. She had given him a different name. She had taught him a different city. She had told him that the safest thing a man from a dead family could do was to make himself useful to a living one, not as a member, not as someone with status, as a function, as a person who was necessary but not notable. He had become a guard. It was the most logical outcome. Guarding gave him proximity to power without requiring him to claim any. It gave him access to rooms without requiring him to explain why he deserved to be in them. It gave him a reason to be present at events like this one without anyone asking who his father was. He said he had survived by becoming someone who stood behind other people. He said, "I spent my whole life standing behind powerful men so no one would ask who I was." He said it without self-pity. He said it like a fact about the world. Elena said the white flower was not coincidence. She had been watching for that signal for years, not because she expected it, because she remembered that the same signal had appeared the night her house burned. She explained that the flower, placed upside down, was not used for general attacks. It had a specific meaning. She said, The flower was not a warning for the room. It was a name tag for the target. It was only used when the target was connected to the Locke bloodline, which meant whoever placed the flower on that table tonight knew Adrian was there, and knew who Adrian was, which meant the threat was not outside the hall. It had been seated inside it. Vittorio Marchesi entered the room without knocking. He had a particular skill. It was the skill of entering any room, as though his presence there was a natural consequence of the situation, rather than something he had arranged. Men who entered rooms like that were difficult to challenge, because challenging them required first establishing that they had no right to be there, and men like Vittorio were very good at having accumulated the kind of standing that made that argument hard to make. He had held his counsel position for 16 years. He had been trusted for 16 years. He had been trusted because he had spent 16 years making himself into exactly the kind of person you trusted. He was still calm. He was still the kind of man who was trusted because he appeared to want nothing for himself. He said he was glad Elena was recovering. He said he understood the difficulty of the evening. He said he was concerned about what would happen next. He said the council had a responsibility to maintain stability. He said there was a provision in the standing agreements, rarely invoked, called the Bloodline Threat Clause. He explained it in the way that people explained things they had already decided to use. If the descendant of a disbanded family appeared within a council gathering, and their presence created the potential for contested claims, the council was authorized to take that person into protective custody until the matter was reviewed. He said, "I am not saying Adrian is guilty of anything. I am saying his existence in this room creates a risk that none of us signed up to manage tonight." He said, "One forgotten heir can burn 10 families back into war." He said it like a man who was being reasonable. He said it while looking at Lorenzo, not at Adrian. He was correct that he was being reasonable. The Bloodline Threat Clause was real. The logic was real. A living Locke, if recognized, could challenge claims that had been settled for 20 years. Vittorio was not wrong about any of this. He was simply relying on the fact that what he was saying was true in order to obscure why he was saying it. Lorenzo looked at Elena. She was watching Vittorio. She was watching him the way she watched things she had seen before and was waiting to see again. Lorenzo said, "Give me an hour." Vittorio said, of course. He left. Lorenzo looked at the door after it closed. He said, "He wants Adrian held before anyone can testify to what Adrian remembers." Elena said, "Yes." Lorenzo said, "What does Adrian remember?" Adrian said, "I was 8 years old. There are things I am not sure I remember correctly." He said, "But I remember names. And I remember that 2 of the names I heard my father say were names that should not have been at the same table as ours." Elena said, "And one of those names is Marchesi." The room was very quiet. Lorenzo looked at his hands. He had been a boss for 12 years. He had made decisions in rooms like this one. He had never been in a room where the decision was as clean as this one. He was either going to protect the man his wife had taken a bullet for, or he was going to hand that man to the person who had arranged for the bullet. Bianca said, "If you give him to Vittorio, you are not protecting the family. You are protecting Vittorio's investment in the story that killed the Lockes." She said it to Lorenzo. She said it without looking at Elena. And before that, When Lorenzo had been closest to ordering Adrian held, Elena had said, "If your honor needs him dead before you ask why he was targeted, then your honor is already being used by the man who fired." It was the most honest sequence of the evening. Lorenzo stood. He said, "Bring me the archivist." Aldo was a small man who kept records in a building attached to a church that no one visited because it was not valuable enough to bother with. He arrived 20 minutes later with a folder that smelled of old paper. He confirmed that a fire had occurred on the night he had it documented. He confirmed that a man named Adrian Locke had been present. He confirmed that a child had been carried out and that subsequent records listed one Locke child unaccounted for after the family's dissolution. The folder also contained something else, a financial transfer record from the period immediately after the Locke family's assets were liquidated. A notable portion had been processed through an account associated with the Marchesi family trust. Not all of it, not in a way that was illegal on its face, but enough that the question of why that account had received those funds was a question no one had asked. Because no one had thought to look, because the lockers were gone, and it was simpler to let the ledger close than to open it again. Lorenzo read the document. He had been in business long enough to know what a transfer record that had been processed carefully looked like. It looked like this. The amounts were distributed across several entries. The timing was staggered. The account description was neutral. If you were not looking for it, you would not see it. If you were looking for it because you had already been told where to look, it was unmistakable. He read it twice. He looked at the figure next to the Marchesi account designation. He looked at the dates. He did the arithmetic about what had happened in the weeks after those dates. Who had received the council elder seat that opened? Who had voted on the final resolution concerning the Locke assets? Who had been positioned, after all of it, to benefit most from the particular way the Locke story had ended? The document did not prove everything, but it proved enough. Lorenzo read the document. He read it twice. He looked at Bianca. Bianca looked at the document. She said nothing. She did not have to. Vittorio returned before the hour was up. He said the councils had a procedural requirement. Under the summit charter, any bloodline challenge had to be resolved before the peace gathering formally closed. The summit closed in 40 minutes. If no resolution was reached, the bloodline threat clause defaulted to custody pending review, which meant Adrian would be transferred to council holding, outside Moretti jurisdiction, outside Lorenzo's reach. He said the council was asking for a resolution. He said the other families were becoming unsettled. He said he could manage the narrative if Lorenzo would give him something to work with. He said it was for everyone's benefit. Elena said, "I was a child when the first white flower was turned upside down. I remember what men like you hoped children would forget." Vittorio looked at her. He said, "Mrs. Moretti, you are recovering from a wound. You should not be." Lorenzo said, "She is speaking." Vittorio stopped. Lorenzo said, "The bullet line places the shot at Adrian's position. The flower is a lock signal. The camera on the mezzanine was adjusted using credentials that belong to the council security account, not to mine. Adrian was moved to his position tonight on the basis of a request that came through your coordination. And the shooter accessed the mezzanine through the service corridor. which was opened using the same council security credentials 11 seconds before the camera was repositioned. The shell casing is still on the floor. He said it in the same voice he used for contracts. Not loud, not emotional. Vittorio said, whether the bullet was meant for him or not, the fact remains. Adrian Locke is a bloodline threat under standing agreement. He said, even if everything you're describing is accurate, it doesn't change the operative question. Adrian Locke is a bloodline threat under standing agreement. His existence, Elena said, no, he is not the danger to peace. He is the witness to the crime you called peace. The room was quiet. Vittorio looked at her. Then he looked at Adrian. He said, a dead family should remain useful by staying dead. He said it because he had run out of other things to say. He said it because when you have exhausted every reasonable argument and the reasonable arguments have all failed, the only thing left is the thing you actually believe. The room heard it. Every person in the room heard what it meant. Adrian said before Lorenzo could speak, if I die as a guard, they get to kill Locke without admitting Locke survived. Lorenzo stopped. Vittorio said, the vote proceeds regardless. He said the charter required it. He said he was not the enemy. He said it with the expression of a man who had prepared this moment for a very long time. Lorenzo said, you cannot arrest the council's law because you dislike the man invoking it. He said it before Adrian could speak. He said it directly at Vittorio. Then he said, no, but I can arrest the man who used the law to protect a murder. Vittorio said nothing. He had nothing left to say that would help him. Adrian stepped forward. He did not wait for Lorenzo. He said, record my name. He said it to the hall. He said it to the documentation process that was still running. He said it knowing that once it was in the record, it could not be erased by a council vote. He had been standing behind Elena since they came into this room. He had been behind her in this hall. He had been behind every powerful person he had stood near for 20 years. He had learned to read the temperature of rooms without being in them. He had learned to anticipate what would be needed before it was asked for. He had learned the geometry of protection, where to stand, how to move, what to do when the thing you were there to prevent arrived anyway. He had never learned what to do when the thing that needed protecting was not the person in front of him. He stepped out from behind her. He stood in the center of the room. He said his name. He said the full name. He said it to the room and to the record being kept by the hall's documentation process. He said, my father kept ledgers. He kept them because he believed the record was protection. He believed if he wrote down what was true, truth could not be completely destroyed. He said, he was wrong about that. But he was not wrong about writing it down. He said, I know what the ledgers contained. I know who signed what. And I know that Vittorio Marchesi was present at the meeting where the decision was made to burn those records along with everything else. Vittorio said, that is not. Lorenzo said, arrest him, not loudly. He said it the way he said everything that was final. Vittorio was held before he reached the door. The other families had been gathered in the main hall. They had been waiting for a resolution. Lorenzo gave them one. He stood in front of the hall, and he said what he had learned that evening. He said he had been ready to punish the man his wife saved before he asked why that man needed saving. He said this as a public acknowledgement, not a confession, Not an apology in the soft sense, a statement of fact about a mistake he had almost made and what it would have cost. He said, "I was ready to punish the man my wife saved before I asked why he needed saving." He paused. He said, "That is over." He stated 4 laws before the full council. He said no guard would be tried for being protected before the direction of the threat was established. He said no bloodline threat clause could be invoked to detain a person before they had been heard as a witness. He said any attack in a peace gathering would require trajectory analysis, camera review, and position review before a motive was assigned. He said a survivor of a disbanded family was to be protected as a witness before being classified as a threat. He signed all 4 in front of the assembled families, not as a gift, not as a demonstration of generosity, as a correction. He had built a house where someone like Vittorio could use his honor as a lever. He was now building a different set of rules. When the hall had emptied enough that the evening could be called over, Lorenzo found Elena near the window of the side room. She was standing. Her shoulder was bandaged. She was looking at the garden, which had lights that someone had left on. Someone had put those lights in to make the garden look welcoming from inside. They had not known what would happen in the hall. She found it strange that things kept being beautiful during the days when they went wrong. He said, "You should have told me." She said, "I was waiting for you to become the kind of man who would protect the truth even when it wounded your pride." He was quiet. He said, "And now?" She looked at him. She said, "Tonight you got there. Now prove you can stay there when the truth costs more than pride." She said it without softening it. She said it the way she said things that still needed to be true tomorrow. He accepted it. Elena came to the door where Adrian was standing. She said, "Your father saved me once." Adrian said, "Tonight, you returned a debt he never asked you to carry." Adrian nodded. He looked at Lorenzo. He said he did not know what came next. He said he did not have a home to go to or a name that was safe to use. He said he had been a shadow for a long time. Lorenzo said, "You have a name now. Use it." He said, "You have a claim. File it." He said, "The ledgers your father kept. If there are records you have access to, bring them to the archivist, not to me, to the record." He said, "I am not giving you this because I owe you something." He said, "I am giving you this because the man who tried to kill you used my house to do it. That is a debt I intend to pay." He said it simply. He said it in the way that things were offered when they were not charity, but correction. Adrian Locke left the Moretti Hall that night as a named man. That was the difference. Elena Moretti took a bullet for her bodyguard, and the whole room called it betrayal. But the bullet had never been meant for her. It had been meant for Adrian Locke, the last living name of a family powerful men thought they had buried. By dawn, the Moretti family learned a rule every empire should fear. A wife's courage is not always an affair. A guard's silence is not proof he has no name, and sometimes the person standing behind the throne is the truth everyone tried to kill.